The world knew Céline Dion as the queen of beautiful songs. Her powerful voice touched people's hearts like thunder, making every note feel special and stopping hearts for a moment. But not many people knew that behind all that brightness was someone who felt fragile inside, always wanting just one person to lean on. When René Angélil came into her life, she held on to him like he was the only light in a dark room, making him her whole world. Even when René got caught up in gambling problems, when people gossiped about him cheating, or when shocking rumors spread about him, Céline still stood quietly by his side, putting up with everything, protecting him, and loving him so much she forgot about herself. Everything truly fell apart when cancer started taking René away with no way to stop it. On a January night in 2016, in a quiet hospital room, Céline knelt down and held the hand of the man she had depended on her whole life as it grew cold. "Don't go," she whispered softly. It was a desperate wish that fate wouldn't answer. When René took his last breath, the bright light she had built in her career suddenly went dark, leaving a queen standing all alone in a kingdom that had just lost its king. The world called it a tragedy, a terrible loss, something shocking. But to Céline, it felt like the whole sky had fallen down on her. Because from the time she was 12 years old, René wasn't just her manager. He was the person who saw her, believed in her, and lifted her up before anyone else even knew her name. When he died, she didn't just lose a husband. She lost the heartbeat that showed her the way, the only thing keeping her standing strong under the bright lights of fame. Now, while dealing with a painful sickness in her final years, Céline has chosen to start telling her life story. A story that starts in brightness, crawls through darkness, and touches truths that not everyone is brave enough to look at. That journey from this moment forward begins now. Céline Dion's childhood started in a crowded little house where the laughter of many brothers and sisters mixed with the tired sounds of being poor. No baby crib, no bed of her own, just a small drawer that was barely big enough to fit a newborn baby. Night after night, she grew up surrounded by the sounds of more than a dozen siblings. The smell of old clothes and the heavy feeling of days without enough filled the air. Even though her family loved each other, that warmth couldn't cover up how small and lonely she felt, like a child who always thought she didn't really belong anywhere. The pain got worse at school, where kids called her vampire. She was skinny and pale, with two big front teeth that stuck out like they were trying to escape from her face. Some days after school, kids would block her way, spit in her hair, and rip her school uniform. Céline would run home, hide in the closet, and cry while hugging a pillow. Nobody came looking for her. Her mom was busy cooking for more than a dozen hungry mouths. Her dad was busy fixing pianos for customers. She learned really early that no matter how loud you cry, nobody is promised to come wipe away your tears. By age 9, she was already standing on tables in the family bar, singing until her voice hurt so customers would leave tips. Some nights, drunk men would stuff money into her shirt collar, touching her cheek with hands that smelled like beer. She would just stand there, pressing her lips together tight while she kept singing, knowing that if she stopped, her family wouldn't have money to buy bread the next morning. When the lights went dim, she would quietly sit behind the curtains, hugging her knees, silently wondering, will anyone in this world ever sing to me? Just once. As the youngest kid, she saw all her brothers and sisters go through hard times, heard sad grown-up conversations they thought she couldn't understand, and learned to be quiet very early. That quietness became her habit, her way of protecting herself. Like she was always scared that saying one wrong thing would hurt someone or make someone leave. Celine's success includes selling over 250 million albums around the world. Money from classic songs like My Heart Will Go On, Because You Loved Me, and The Power of Love keeps bringing in tens of millions of dollars every year. Her two legendary shows in Las Vegas at Caesars Palace from 2003 to 2019 made more than $681 million total, making her the most successful solo artist doing shows in one place in history. These shows brought in huge amounts of steady money, becoming the financial backbone holding up her family. Céline also owned an amazing collection of houses, including a huge Bahamas-style mansion in Jupiter Island, Florida, that was worth $72 million. She later sold it. A French-style castle on a private island in Quebec worth $25.5 million, and luxury penthouse apartments in both Las Vegas and Montreal. From childhood, Céline believed that once she found the man of her life, she would love him in a way that made the world stop. Céline was determined that when she found the one she loved, she would give him everything. Her gentleness, her vulnerability, even the hidden parts of herself she never let anyone touch. And that day came, the fateful day Céline met René Angélil. She just didn't know that from that moment on, her fate was meant to include suffering. People could laugh and whisper that Céline was too dependent, that she lived only for him, but she would just smile softly and shake her head. In those sad eyes, he wasn't just support. He was the sky, her breath, the reason her heart kept beating through all the heartbreak, because the only thing she ever wanted was love. They met on an afternoon that seemed normal, but it accidentally opened a chapter that would last nearly 40 years. At that time, Céline was only 12, fragile, shy, with wide eyes that always looked like they were waiting for the world to hurt her. René, on the other hand, was already halfway through his life, carrying failures and the last hopes of a man trying to hold on to his career. The audition happened in such silence you could almost hear someone's heart drop. Céline sang like it was the only way to exist, while René stood there frozen, overwhelmed by how pure her voice was, something he thought he would never hear again. Right at that moment, a quiet promise woke up inside René. He would protect this little girl, open doors her family only dared to dream about. And Céline, with the innocence of a child raised in poverty and need, looked at him with complete trust, like a father, a guide, someone who could turn a harsh world into a place to feel safe. In the years after that, they lived in the same world. René led, protected, and guided. Céline trained, worked hard, and broke through barriers. He borrowed money against his own house to make her first album, like he was betting his whole future on a little girl who didn't yet understand what sacrifice meant. They stuck together on every trip, in every recording studio, on every tiny stage. And slowly, on long nights getting ready for performances, through mistakes and recoveries, Céline started feeling something strange. A soft, breath-like flutter that got clearer each day. At 16, she still didn't understand love, much less dependence. She only knew that when René nodded his head, she felt safe. When he frowned, her heart squeezed tight like she had ruined the whole world. She sang to make him proud, worked hard so he would notice her, and stumbled because she was afraid of disappointing him. That feeling wasn't romantic love yet. It was the instinct of a child who never had anything to hold on to, now finding a single star shining in her sky. Over time, that dependence grew deeper, quieter, more subtle. On tour in cold hotel rooms at night, just hearing René's footsteps in the hallway calmed her down, like he was holding the whole world together under her feet. She got used to him being there, the one who just by standing behind her made everything in her life feel meaningful. Though nobody said it out loud, René was the only person who made her feel like she wasn't small anymore, like she wasn't lost. As she became a teenager, Céline realized she loved him with a love both pure and strong enough to scare her. She loved René's calmness. The way he patiently watched over every step she took, the warmth hidden under his quiet personality. But she also knew the distance between them was too wide, too unusual, enough to make people whisper and talk. And yet, whenever she stood in front of him, all logic disappeared. Her heart picked René long before she understood what love really was. The real spark happened when Céline was around 18 or 19, old enough to recognize her own feelings. During a trip preparing for Eurovision, they sat together in a quiet hotel room. The warm light fell across his face, and Céline realized she didn't look at him as a teacher anymore, but as the man who made her whole inside world shake. The night she won the competition, they shared their first kiss. A clumsy, unfamiliar, but burning kiss that neither of them could ever undo. "I've loved you since the first day I heard you sing," René whispered. Céline cried, tears dripping onto his collar. She knew she had found her true home, but that love wasn't welcomed. Céline's family, especially her mother, exploded with fear and anger. A young girl loving a man 26 years older, how could that ever be right? But Céline, with a heart already decided, just shook her head through tears. "This is my life." Their love became a silent battle between her heart and the world's judgment, between private longing and public criticism. But she didn't back down. Her love for René was too strong, too gentle, too real. As her career went worldwide, they chose to keep their love quiet. They hid it for 5 years. On stage, she called him Mr. Angélil. Behind the curtains, she called him Moan. They dated in hotel rooms nobody knew about, held hands under dim lights, afraid that even one touch would reveal everything. Her mother cried every night begging her to reconsider. But Céline just hugged her and whispered, "Mom, I only have him." Céline was scared that judgment would hurt René, and he was scared people would say she loved him out of gratitude or because he had influence over her. They loved each other in backstage silence, in long days apart, in quick glances exchanged before crowds. Every phone call, every little note left on a desk became a thread tying them closer together. By 1991, when their love was strong enough to handle doubt, they got engaged. But Céline didn't announce it right away. She waited until 1993 when she released the album The Color of My Love to write in the thank you notes lines that made the whole world shake. An admission that she had loved him for so long and couldn't hide it anymore. The world might not have been ready, but her heart had been ready for years. Their 1994 wedding happened like a fairy tale. Céline entered Notre Dame in a 7-kilogram crystal gown, wearing a crown, seeing only one person, the man waiting at the end of the aisle. When the priest asked, "Do you agree?" she answered through tears, "We poor Taugers, yes, forever." They exchanged rings 3 times, once in Montreal, once in Las Vegas, once in their hearts. But few people knew that the first cracks had appeared long before. So small nobody noticed. But enough to spread silently, enough to push a whole life off its planned path. And as those wounds piled up on each other, weaving into an invisible net tightening around her, everything started to break in ways nobody could fix. The early 2000s carved a cold wound through the lives of Céline Dion and René Angélil. A wound nobody could see, but one that quietly bled. While the Las Vegas lights still shined bright, while concert halls echoed with a voice that softened the whole world, behind the scenes a dark storm was forming, slow and unstoppable. Rumors of wandering footsteps, of dancers and casino workers, of shadowy late-night meetings. Each became an invisible knife cutting at the image of an unbreakable marriage. Then in 2002, the lawsuit hit like lightning, tearing the sky. A woman came forward with her own painful story, accusing René of assaulting her in a hotel room in 2000. A lawsuit was filed. Statements cold and hard, but cutting deep enough to shake hearts. Nobody knew what was truth, what was fear, what was despair turned into accusation. Nothing had been proven. But just the existence of such a claim by itself was enough to burn through the fragile peace Céline was desperately holding onto. The media circled like a pack of starving wolves. Tabloid newspapers plastered sensational headlines everywhere. Stories grew bigger, got twisted, mixed truth and lies together. René denied everything, calling it lies made up to get his money and ruin his reputation. But in the quiet of a dark room, you couldn't help but wonder, could a family truly stay standing after such a storm? Could a woman still sing about love while her own heart was being wrapped in doubt and pain? Then the truth came out in an unexpected direction. The woman and her husband were accused of blackmail, then arrested, then found guilty. The heavy accusations that once rocked the public were now seen as tools in a scheme to get money. But ironically, even when part of the story was cleared up, the pain left behind didn't disappear. No court decision could erase the wound that suspicion had carved. Some rumors claimed that years after the lawsuit and blackmail conviction, their marriage shook, that at one moment Céline almost let go under the crushing pressure. Nothing was confirmed, no words spoken by either of them. Only shadows lingering behind the image of a couple believed to be inseparable. And sometimes the things left unspoken hurt the most. Because beyond the quiet pain of possible infidelity, Céline also suffered an unhealable wound from the man she loved with her whole heart being tangled up in gambling. René Angélil had a deep problem within himself, a terrifying habit. Every step into a casino was a step into an addiction he couldn't escape. Every card, every chip added invisible financial weight onto his shoulders. While people saw the dazzling glow from Céline's performances, they had no idea that behind the curtains were blazing red numbers. Silent debts René was trying to hide, carrying alone in silence. Even though Céline Dion saw this pain when René came back from casinos with enormous debts, she chose forgiveness. To her, this was a long-standing habit of the man she loved, a part of him she decided to accept. Many sources and books claim that René once used Céline's shows at Caesar's palace to pay off his debts. Every residency contract, every show night seemed to be both a success and a prisoner to a burden. The casino liked him because he was a high roller, someone who bet big money. But that favoritism meant the Dion Angélil family had to live in a world balanced between light and shadow, between applause and silent fear. The truth is that René once lost millions of dollars, but the publicly released numbers were only the tip of the iceberg. Media exaggeration made everything worse, pushing the family into the center of public watching. Outsiders only saw gambling losses or his addiction, but few recognized the pressure placed on their marriage, their careers, and the mental health of two people living between glory and pain. And so every one of Céline's performances became a battle of survival, singing while silently saving her family from the edge of debt. René, though consumed by gambling, was still the husband, the manager, the man she trusted. Forgiveness and acceptance became an unspoken choice, a quiet victory over tragedy. But in silent moments, Céline still wrestled with helplessness, with the pain of watching the man she loved fall deeper into the trap of the red and black tables. For many years, Céline Dion felt trapped in an emotional maze with René at its center. Unable to step outside his embrace, she was scared that if she left him, the world would become so empty that nobody, nothing could ever fill that hole. And would anyone else ever make her feel such deep love? From the moment Céline met René at just 12 years old, the bond that formed between them wasn't just between an artist and a manager, but between a child looking for safety and a grown man with the power, experience, and influence to shape her future. To Céline, he wasn't only the one who discovered her talent, but the only person who had seen her worth from the very beginning. That recognition planted a seed of dependence, a root that grew so deep that later, no matter how painful things became, she still couldn't walk away. The more she grew up, the more Céline realized how big and harsh the world outside could be. But amid all that chaos, René stayed the only steady point. He was the one making decisions for her, protecting her, shielding her from pressure and media. That dependence was silent but powerful, making it impossible for Céline to break free even when she got hurt. Deep down, she always believed that if she lost René, her life would fall apart, her voice would lose meaning, and her career path would fade into uncertainty. And because he had seen every rise and fall, every step of her growth, Céline carried an almost total fear of being abandoned. She couldn't imagine a life without him standing behind every spotlight. When rumors came up, when life together grew heavy with pressure, when gambling and emotional burdens made the home atmosphere suffocating, Céline still chose silence. Not because she didn't hurt, but because she was scared that if she spoke up, everything would shatter. Her life had been tied to him for so long that their relationship was no longer just love. It was like roots wrapped around her heart. Tearing them out would make it bleed. She put up with it because the fear of loss was bigger than the pain of being wounded. That feeling wasn't only love, it was thankfulness. It was the memory of a child once rescued from an unfinished dream. That's why whenever she thought about leaving, Céline felt like she would be betraying the younger version of herself, the little girl who believed René was the only person in the world who would never turn his back on her. And it was this very belief that kept her bound tightly into adulthood. Until René's final hours, Céline stayed strong at his side, taking care of every smallest detail for the man to whom she had given her entire life. That love wasn't just loyalty. It was a great fire burning through the darkness of loss, proving the extraordinary strength of a woman's heart. They say cancer is a disease, but to Céline it felt like a silent punishment the universe delivered at the exact moment she thought she had everything. She remembered clearly the day the doctors announced René had throat cancer. She froze, like a cold wind had blown through her chest and left a crack that would never heal. René suddenly became so fragile that even a cough made her shake. From that moment on, the fear of losing him clung to her like a shadow she couldn't shake off. During the first months of treatment, Céline lived in a state between being clear-headed and being in a fog. Every morning she woke up with panic. What if today he got weaker? What if one evening she came home and didn't hear him call her name anymore? She hid that fear behind her smile, but anyone paying attention could see her eyes getting hollow, like she had been crying under the bathroom lights before stepping onto the stage. When René couldn't eat normally anymore, Céline became his hands, his eyes, his breath. She blended his meals, fed him through a tube, wiped drops of sweat from his forehead when pain made his body curl up. Many nigh. T.S. When René fell asleep from medicine, she sat by the bed, staring at the thin face of the man who once seemed so powerful the world had to look up at him, and her tears fell without a sound. The most painful moments were when he tried to speak, but his voice was so weak it felt like a thread about to break. Every raspy word forced through his damaged throat made her chest tighten. She would lean close, hold his hand, and whisper, "I'm here. Say it, love." But sometimes, even then, all she could hear was the sound of breath falling like a thin wind, an emptiness that tore her heart apart. When the cancer came back the second time, then the third, Céline felt like she was falling into a bottomless hole. She paused her singing career, paused her life outside, pulling back into a small world where only she and René existed. She said no to meetings, events, camera flashes. Like fame, success, and glory were meaningless dust if the man lying in that bed would no longer wake up beside her. At night, she didn't sleep. She lay there listening to his breathing, scared that if she closed her eyes for even a minute, she would wake to a morning without warmth beside her. Sometimes he would wake and say he was tired, that he was scared. And in those moments, Céline understood that the deepest love isn't beautiful promises, but pretending to be strong so the person dying a little more each day can still believe in hope. The day René whispered that he wanted to go in her arms, Céline felt her heart split in two. One half begged God to keep him alive, the other knew he was too exhausted and needed to be free. She said nothing, just placed her hand on his cheek and kissed his pale forehead, like trying to hold him back with the last warmth left in her life. In the final months, Céline was a wife, a nurse, and the keeper of the family flame. She took care of him in every detail, changed his medicine, kept his feeding tube from getting blocked, massaged him when pain tightened his muscles, sang to him when he didn't have strength to open his eyes anymore. They didn't talk much anymore. They just held hands tightly, like every squeeze was a plea. Don't go. And then on the morning of January 14th, 2016, something changed in the silence of the room. No more faint breaths, no more quiet turning. Céline knew instantly, even before she touched him, that her world had changed color. She sat beside her husband's still warm body, laid her head on his shoulder like she had done countless times over 3 decades, and for the first time his shoulder didn't lean back into hers. From that moment on, their love was no longer a private story, but a lifelong promise proven through an entire existence. When René got sick, Céline left the spotlight to be by him, just like he had spent decades standing behind her to lift her up. When he got weak, she grew strong. When he trembled, she held his hand tightly. And in every moment, no matter what the world said about dependence or age difference, she just smiled. Because nobody but them knew how deeply their hearts had been tied together. Their love started with music, grew in secrecy, matured through opposition, and survived pain and illness. It wasn't an easy love, and it wasn't a perfect one. But it was the love of two people who saw in each other what the world couldn't: a place to return to, a sky to breathe under, a heart to love without fear. After René left this world, Céline's life was pulled into a cold emptiness she couldn't describe. The first mornings without his voice, without the feeling of a shoulder to lean on, made the large house suddenly feel endless, like every sound had been swallowed up. And then in that silence, she whispered to herself, "I'm still here, René, but I don't know how to move forward." It wasn't a complaint, but the whisper of a lost soul clinging to the last bit of warmth. But as soon as her tears dried, her 3 sons called for their mother. Céline had to wipe away every sign of grief and stand up. Even though her body felt drained, she knew that from the moment René closed his eyes, his role had shifted onto her thin shoulders to be a father, a mother, a pillar. So every day she reminded herself to be strong, not because she wanted to, but because she had no other choice. They need me, and I need to be strong enough for their father's part too. In the first months after the funeral, she rarely left the house. She spent all her time with her children, eating with them, studying with them, putting them to bed, telling stories, holding them longer and tighter. Every time little Nelson asked, "Where is Daddy?" Céline felt her heart squeeze, sad, aching, helpless. But she would answer in a voice as gentle as wind, "Daddy is here in my heart and in yours." She had to be their light, even though she herself was lost in darkness. Just as her spirit hadn't healed yet, her body betrayed her. Stiff person syndrome struck like a sentence delivered without warning. The M. Uscal spasms, the days she could barely walk, the nights she couldn't sleep from pain. It made her feel like life was testing her with its cruelest trials. In 2022, Céline stood in front of the camera, her hands shaking so badly she had to grip the table edge to keep steady. She spoke, her voice breaking bit by bit. The syndrome was trapping her body day by day. Sudden seizures, physically painful therapy sessions, the times she reached for a familiar high note only to hear it break in her throat. She cried not out of giving up, but because she still wanted to sing, still wanted to live, even as her body betrayed her in the harshest way. At times, Céline confessed she felt like an invisible hand was gripping her throat whenever she tried to sing. And in the dark, she could only cry, whispering, "René, if you were here, you'd know what to do." Someone once asked her softly, "Céline, do you regret it? If you hadn't met certain people, would your life have been less painful?" She was quiet for a moment, then answered with surprising certainty, "Yes. But without those wounds, I could never sing the way I do today. Every scar is a note, every drop of blood a melody." Pain taught her how to fly on torn wings, and those wings carried her voice through every storm. And maybe that's the most beautiful thing left after all the loss. The strength of a heart once shattered but still capable of planting hope again. Céline wants to tell everyone watching her now that even if you never stand on stage, even if you never hold a microphone, you still have a song inside your heart. Never let anyone steal it. People may doubt you, make fun of you, try to put out your light, but keep singing in any way you can. As long as your song exists, they cannot win. Days pass slowly in sunny Las Vegas. The final rays of sunset touch her small garden, casting a fragile golden color over hair that has weathered countless sleepless nights. Céline sits there holding her youngest son, kissing the little head that still smells like sunshine. Her hands still shake. Her legs sometimes fail her, and her voice is often swept away by invisible spasms. But that smile, gentle, calm, says everything. It's not the smile of a diva before a sea of camera flashes, and it's not a forced smile to comfort the world. It's the smile of a woman who has walked through hell, suffered wounds carved deep into her heart, lost almost everything, but still has love and music to hold herself together. If you have stayed with me until the end of this story, thank you for taking the time to feel this journey filled with tears but also hope. If you wish to continue walking with me, hearing more, living through stories that make the heart shake, please follow the channel. Every subscription is not just a click, but a small whisper sent to Céline and to those fighting every day. You are not alone.